Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second week of the spring 2020 semester. So, last week I had you do a little bit of internet research, and I had you look at my PowerPoint slideshow, and I got you a little bit familiar with what led up to where we're going to start from in British literature history, starting with the ancient tribes on the English Isles, like the Celts and the Anglos and the Saxons, all the way up to the Age of Reason, which featured artists and writers like Alexander Pope and Jonathan Swift. So this week we're going to start with the Romantic era. The Romantic era was a major change in British literature history because two authors in particular, which you're going to read this week, William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, started thinking, wait a minute. Now that the printing press is starting to print a whole lot of books, and now that a lot of people who normally would not have had access to the literature of the time of the Age of Reason and the time of any time before that are starting to become a little more literate, why in the world can't we go ahead and write poetry on a level that the average British citizen can understand instead of the highly educated? So people like Swift and Pope and Dryden and Johnson, they all wanted to appeal to the highly educated British reader. Problem is, there weren't as many of those as there were people who could read and write, but maybe had a very small education. So you're going to read the preface to Lyrical Ballads. You're going to read some of the poetry of both William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and you're going to see that their theory was we should be writing poetry for everybody, not just for the snobbish and the elite. And they put out Lyrical Ballads, as the preface will show, as a bit of an experiment where the reader will determine whether this type of poetry is worthwhile or whether it's a waste of time. And clearly that poetry was worthwhile because we're reading it now. So, take a look at Wordsworth and Coleridge. Look at how they are rebelling against the idea of literature and poetry should only be for the elite. And they're saying it should be for everybody. Also take a note of how much they love nature, because we're going to see that they're going to see nature as something that is beneficial to everybody, whereas the later Romantics, when we get to Shelley and when we get to Keats and when we get to Byron, are going to say, not so much. But don't worry about that now. This week, worry about how does Wordsworth define a poet? What does Wordsworth believe poetry should be about? And then take a little look at the differences between Coleridge and Wordsworth. Because Coleridge and Wordsworth are going to be a little bit different. Coleridge wants to be, he still wants to leave open the idea of something like ghosts and goblins, if you will. And you'll see that when you read the well, that's maybe not the best description, but you'll see how he leaves poetry open to the supernatural, as opposed to Wordsworth, who said, no, everything should be more realistic. So I hope you enjoyed this week's poetry. I think that the preface and the poems I have chosen for you are all going to be very enjoyable to you. And remember, there's a reading quiz, so make sure you take that. And there is an essay that's going to ask you to analyze this stuff and to apply your critical thinking skills. Please make sure that you follow all the directions of that essay if you want a really good grade. Read those directions closely.